George Soros publicly destroyed by Elon Musk, and realized it's over. The night smelled like the end of something. Smoke still clung to the walls of the Tesla showroom, like the ghost of a fire no one had quite extinguished. Bits of melted glass and scorched plastic crunched beneath Elon Musk's shoes as he stepped slowly, deliberately, into the carcass of what had once been a cathedral of innovation. Now, it looked more like a war zone. The lights overhead flickered, dying embers of electricity pulsing like a weak heartbeat inside a body that hadn't realized it was dead yet. The air was thick, not just with smoke, but with the scent of betrayal. In the center of the room, half a Tesla Model S lay melted into the floor, its iconic silhouette warped into something grotesque. A mechanical corpse. And above it, smeared in red spray paint, the message that would spark everything: end tech tyranny. Musk didn't flinch. His face was still, too still, not numb, something colder than numb. His eyes moved with the precision of a machine wired to record every detail. No panic, no anger, just focus. He moved toward the front desk, where charred metal framed the remains of a once sleek reception area. There, stuck between the frame and a leg of a partially vaporized chair, was a half-burned piece of paper. Scorched. Yes, but still legible. He pulled it free. Musk or U.S. Protest TOOLKIT V2. One regional disruption schedule. Elon's jaw didn't tighten, but his eyes did. A quiet narrowing, like a sniper aligning crosshairs. Footsteps approached behind him. Sir, a voice. Young. Nervous. Elon turned slightly. The technician looked barely 25 and was gripping a tablet like a shield. We pulled the archive. Their site's been wiped, but we recovered everything: recruitment logs, payment schedules, forum scripts. They were paying people $200 a day per person to cause chaos, specifically in front of Tesla dealerships. West of the Mississippi. Musk said nothing. He took the tablet, scrolled. Read phrases like blend in, film everything, don't use your real name. If approached, shout climate justice. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. This wasn't protest, he said. His voice was low, steady, razor sharp. This was performance, paid, coordinated, industrialized. He stood, brushing ash off his blazer. They didn't just target Tesla, he said, turning back to the technician. They came for trust. They came to fracture perception, and someone paid them to do it. The words hung in the air, thick with implication. You don't organize this kind of operation without serious capital, Elon continued. And people with that kind of capital, they don't burn showrooms for headlines. They burn them to test how far they can bend reality before the public stops looking. He looked around the wreckage, like a general surveying the aftermath of a skirmish. But this wasn't the end. It was the prologue. By morning, the ruins had been erased, literally. Where shattered glass and acrid air had ruled just hours before, now stood a war room. Polished floors, floating lead grids, hardened steel, reinforced glass. The building had been re-engineered overnight into a fortress of clarity. Hundreds of cameras had been installed. Reporters from around the world gathered, whispering in Mandarin, Arabic, German. Social feeds buzzed with speculation. Something big was coming. And then, without music, without fanfare, Elon walked out. He was dressed plainly, black shirt, dark blazer, no tie. But his posture had changed. This wasn't a CEO giving a quarterly report. This was a man delivering an autopsy. He stepped onto the matte black stage, silent, deliberate. In his hands, only a laptop. He placed it on the podium, didn't check notes, he didn't have any. 3 keystrokes. The screen behind him exploded to life, not with branding, but with a screenshot pulled from the depths of the internet. Crude, raw, unfiltered. A forgotten relic, scraped from the digital tombstone of a website that had tried to erase itself. At the top, Indivisible Action Hub. And beneath it, in bold blue letters, join the Musk Disruption Corps, $200 per day. A ripple moved through the room, not sound, something colder. Like the temperature had dropped 10 degrees. Elon didn't speak loudly, but his words hit like a scalpel. The screenshot was taken at 11:48 p.m., 12 hours after the attack on our Houston showroom. 6 hours before their website vanished. He paused. Let that sink in. They erased their trail, but they forgot about the internet's memory. Click. Next slide. A map. The United States, but not as it usually appears. This one was pockmarked with blood-red pins. Dozens, then hundreds. Each pin marked a funded, organized, and scheduled protest. 217 events, Elon said, in 29 states. Scripts, messaging templates. Paid roles, from agitator to disruptive witness. The room shifted. Reporters glanced at one another. Some gripped pens tighter, others stopped writing entirely. This wasn't a grassroots movement, Elon said. This was a business model, a spreadsheet of outrage, a marketplace of chaos. Click. The next image was just text. White letters on black. The Trump-Musk coup is underway, and we're all paying the price. Not a breath in the room. Elon didn't even look at the screen. His eyes locked on the audience. So, let me get this straight, he said. I start a company. Trump wins an election. Two men operate within the law, and somehow that constitutes a coup? He raised an eyebrow. The silence was deafening. Meanwhile, the side throwing Molotovs, the ones paying actors to scream outside our buildings? He paused. They're the defenders of democracy? The fourth image appeared again. Just text. Every Republican must feel the heat. Every Democrat must know we've got their backs. Elon stepped forward. Calm, but surgical. That's not protest strategy. That's battle doctrine. One side must feel the heat. The other is promised protection. He let the sentence breathe. If that doesn't sound like political warfare to you, then you haven't been paying attention. Another pause. Another click. And then it got worse. Want me to continue with the next section? And then it got worse. The screen behind Elon flickered once, like a heartbeat skipping in real time, before revealing what looked at first glance like a corporate slide deck. White background, taunt, serif fonts, structured bullet points. But at the top, in stark gray, Musk or US, Protester Activation Toolkit for 2.1 confidential, not for public distribution. The title alone changed the room. The posture of reporters stiffened, like they'd just been handed evidence, not story leads. What had begun as a suspicious pattern was now metastasizing into blueprint. Elon stepped aside, allowing the audience full view of the massive display. His hands now clasped behind his back, not defensive, but judicial. What you're looking at isn't a manifesto, he said. It's a manual, not written by activists, but by consultants, not driven by outrage, but by deliverables. The slide scrolled. Section 1, Engagement Strategies for High Visibility, Locations Talking Points for Disruptors. Emotion Triggers for Journalists' Real-Time Messaging Protocols. It read like a military brief disguised as PR planning, but the language betrayed its true purpose: performance warfare, deployed at scale. Elon narrated like a prosecutor. These weren't people showing up with handmade signs and anger in their hearts. These were contractors, with talking points, with debrief forms. Click. Section 2, Compensation Structure. A new chart appeared, almost laughably clinical. Lead disruptor, $250 day viral amplifier, $100 spur post, $250 sieve, trending embedded actor, $175, with loyalty bonus for breaking story quotes. One of the reporters in the second row exhaled sharply, almost too loud. A momentary rupture in composure. They even had people posing as Tesla employees, Elon added, not with rage, but with something far more dangerous: calm certainty. Their job was to whisper doubts inside our walls. Silence thickened. Click. Section 3, Optics Optimization Guidelines. Instructions scrolled: dress middle class, clean, unpolished, avoid extremes. Stage tiers for cameras. Synchronize shouting with media flashes. Do not engage opposition unless visible to recording equipment. Elon didn't mock the absurdity. He simply let it hang, poisonous in its precision. Do you understand? He said finally. They weren't reacting to events. They were creating them. Not because they believed in anything, but because they were paid to pretend. Another slide. 2 photos. Side by side. 2 cities, Austin and Seattle. 1,000 miles apart. But the protesters? Same scarf colors. Same cardboard slogans. Same facial expressions. It was never about Tesla, Elon said. It was never about climate. It was about control. And if they can choreograph outrage, they can choreograph collapse. And then, like fog rolling downhill, the final phase began. From the back of the room, a hush rippled forward. Not gasps, not cries. Something stranger, quieter, like air moving before an earthquake. A figure had entered the room, no entourage, no badge. No need for introduction. A black wool coat, a silver cane. Eyes too clear for someone near 90. Someone whispered it, Soros. Others didn't say it at all. They simply stared. George Soros moved like fog soft, inevitable, as if he hadn't walked in but had always been there, waiting for his moment in the script. He didn't take the podium. He didn't need to. He simply stood, hands still, eyes locked on Elon, then on the crowd. And then he spoke. Economic terrorism, Soros said, his voice silken and grave, such a dramatic term, for a course correction. The room froze. Elon didn't blink, but his voice sharpened. You call paid sabotage a correction? Soros tilted his head, amused. I call it friction. You build influence. That's more dangerous than mobs. He turned slightly, addressing not Musk now, but the cameras, the world. When unelected technocrats control the narrative, the markets, and the future, democracy doesn't die. It gets rerouted. Elon stepped forward, slow and cold. No, you didn't reroute democracy. You outsourced it. To performance artists and digital mercenaries. Soros didn't move. And yet, here we are, he said softly. On your stage, in your building, with your microphones. If I'm the villain, why are you still in control? It was masterful, not a rebuttal, a challenge. Elon paused not in doubt, but in calculation. And then answered, because even villains need the spotlight, and I wanted the world to see who was really pulling the strings. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was electric. Then Elon tapped again. The screen behind him changed not slides now, but faces. Ordinary Americans. A teacher investing in Tesla stock. A farmer using Starlink to monitor weather. A young woman charging her Model 3 to escape rising fuel prices. No narration, no slogans, just reality. You call this chaos, Elon said. I call it choice. Soros didn't reply. He adjusted his scarf, then turned, just slightly, toward the cameras. The world will decide who they believe, he said, and he turned to leave. But Elon wasn't done. They already have. That's why you're here. Two men in black suits moved from the far corners of the room, not fast, not aggressive, just forward. Like inevitability given form. No handcuffs, no arrest, just silent escort. Soros didn't resist. He tapped his cane once on the polished floor, then whispered something inaudible to the crowd, but caught by the closest mic. The expression on his face said everything. Checkmate hadn't happened. But a key piece had just been removed from the board. As Soros was led out, Elon turned once more to the audience. Let the record show, he said, that no citizen, no matter how rich or entrenched, has the right to destabilize a democracy and vanish behind a curtain, untouched. The room didn't applaud. Not at first. It processed. Then the dam broke, pens moved again, earpieces buzzed, live streams pinged. Not because it was over, but because it had just begun. This was never about Tesla, Elon said, or about me. It was about punishing independence, about silencing anyone who refused to play by the old rules. He stepped away from the podium now, hands relaxed at his sides, no longer holding the laptop. The screen behind him faded to black. A new phrase appeared. This isn't about winning. It's about reclaiming the rules. And the world? It held its breath. The world held its breath. And then it exhaled, not with relief, but with reckoning. By dawn, the headlines were no longer speculative. They were declarations. Absolute. Unignorable. Justice Department launches federal investigation into indivisible network Soros. Linked foundations under emergency audit. Tesla sabotage campaign. Traced to foreign financial channels. The shift was seismic. You could feel it ripple through every newsroom, courtroom, and trading floor across the country. It wasn't just a scandal. It was a pivot point. A reminder that in a world drowning in narrative, receipts still matter. And Elon? He was nowhere near the cameras now. Not in the follow-up interviews. Not in the breaking news segments. Not in the headlines racing around the globe. He was in Austin, alone, inside the Tesla boardroom. The only light was the sun bleeding in through the panoramic glass, casting long, sharp shadows over a conference table that had once held blueprints, prototypes, investor decks. Now, it held only a single folder, thick, stamped with the golden seal of the Department of Justice. Across its front, referral for prosecution, George Soros conspiracy to undermine interstate commerce political interference via foreign funding. Elon didn't open it. He didn't need to. The truth had already done its job. He stood, walked slowly to the touchscreen panel on the wall. One final slide appeared never meant for public release. Operation closed, public trust rebooting. He stared at it for a long time. And then, with no audience to impress, no press to brief, he said, softly not to anyone in the room, but to the world beyond it, they thought democracy was fragile. Something you could break with enough noise, enough strings, enough fire. But they forgot. He turned away from the screen. It was built to fight back. Meanwhile, across 5 states, chaos met consequence. Federal agents in windbreakers swarmed warehouses posing as activist hubs. Dozens were arrested, not protesters, contractors, not believers, employees. Some tried to run, most didn't. They wore matching jackets, carried burner phones. Some still had staging scripts open on their tablets as they were cuffed. Footage of a black sedan pulling into a federal courthouse spread like wildfire. The figure stepping out was hidden beneath a brimmed hat, but the headlines filled in the rest. A Soros deputy, former foundation executive, now government witness. That afternoon, the Attorney General stepped before a sea of microphones. No slogans, no spin. Just the facts. We have uncovered a coordinated network of domestic disruption. It was funded through foreign foundations, executed via digital recruitment platforms, and aimed at destabilizing both commerce and civil trust. This was not protest. This was orchestrated interference. And we intend to pursue prosecution to the fullest extent of the law. He didn't name Soros. He didn't have to. The message had landed. Inside Senate chambers, subpoenas flew faster than sound bites. The Subcommittee on Political Interference reconvened in emergency session. Whistleblowers emerged, one by one, some trembling, some defiant, all of them holding something. Screenshots. Emails. Wire transfers. One woman, mid-30s, former PR strategist for an activist campaign, told the committee, "We weren't told to protest. We were told to simulate protest. We had quotas, daily disruption metrics. We ran meetings like a marketing agency, targeting, performance reviews, cost per impact. This wasn't resistance. It was a product launch. The myth of untouchability collapsed, and so did Indivisible. Its website vanished. Its directors fled or resigned. Its legal team issued blanket denials, but the Protester Toolkit V2, one had already been entered into the congressional record, not as policy guidance, but as evidence. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the EU issued a formal inquiry into foreign political interference operations. Germany's chancellor called it a transatlantic wake-up call. The UK froze assets linked to Soros-affiliated shell foundations operating within London's NGO circuits. And in Canada, officials began auditing civil disobedience groups receiving anonymous crypto funding. But back in the US, the reckoning wasn't just judicial, it was cultural. News anchors who had once dismissed Musk as erratic or dangerous were now scrambling to contextualize their past skepticism. Panel shows backpedaled. Tech journalists deleted tweets. A viral clip of a CNN anchor apologizing on air became the most watched video on the internet for 3 straight days. "We didn't know," she said. "We didn't check. We assumed, and we got it wrong." Public trust, bruised and bloodied, began to crawl back toward the light. In classrooms, college debate teams held sessions titled, "Was Elon Musk right all along?" In coffee shops, quiet conversations returned real ones, not algorithm-fed outrage loops. And in one particular living room, somewhere in Ohio, an 11-year-old girl pointed at the screen and asked her dad, "Why would someone pay people to pretend to be angry?" He didn't know how to answer. but he was glad she'd asked, because that was the point. All of this, every slide, every keystroke, every ruined showroom wasn't about spectacle. It was about revealing the mechanism. Elon hadn't just exposed sabotage, he had exposed the theater of sabotage, where protest wasn't organic, where outrage was funded, where fear was performed on cue, on camera, on command. And in doing so, he hadn't just defended Tesla. He defended something far older, consensus reality. The idea that what we see, what we feel, what we believe isn't always someone else's product. In the weeks that followed, more arrests were made, more documents leaked. And slowly, almost painfully, America remembered what it felt like to look at a news headline and believe it again. But belief alone wouldn't be enough, because while Soros had vanished from the stage, the machine he'd funded still had gears turning elsewhere. Other toolkits, other platforms, other actors. And Elon, he knew it. That's why he wasn't giving speeches anymore. He was building something, something quiet, something infrastructural, not flashy, not public, just ready. A new firewall, not digital, but civic. Because if reality was now a battlefield, then truth needed a defense system. And this time, it wouldn't come from headlines or hashtags. It would come from people, real ones, unpaid, unsponsored, unscripted. Because the next act wasn't about Musk, it was about us. Absolutely. Here's part 4, seamlessly continuing from the final theme of part 3, the shift from revelation to reconstruction, from individual defense to collective empowerment, while maintaining the cinematic, politically charged narrative tone you requested. It wasn't about Musk anymore. It was about us. And that's exactly how he wanted it. In the weeks that followed, while the media fixated on courtroom sketches and asset freezes, Elon disappeared again, not into exile, but into infrastructure. He didn't hold another press conference, didn't tweet, didn't stream a podcast, or schedule a shareholder address. Instead, behind sealed factory walls, encrypted networks, and repurposed Starlink bandwidth, he started building something else. Not a car, not a rocket, not a satellite, a civic firewall. Not firewalls in the traditional sense. No code, no ports, no antivirus algorithms. This was deeper. This was social infrastructure. Musk's new doctrine wasn't digital defense. It was narrative immunization. And the pilot program launched in absolute silence. In Nebraska, a school district received a mysterious donation, a fleet of solar-powered routers with Starlink uplinks, pre-installed with anonymous learning software, no branding, no logos, just a name, Project Atlas. In New Mexico, a Native American reservation gained free access to a tool called Echo Verify, a real-time media authentication scanner that flagged performative activism, deepfakes, or foreign-influenced outrage campaigns. In Detroit, a community center opened its basement to what appeared to be a startup incubator, but it wasn't building businesses. It was running simulations, cognitive ones, measuring how fast a disinformation trend could infect a neighborhood, mapping emotional contagion in real time. And in every one of these installations, the same phrase appeared in small, fine print on a single placard, built for the people who live in the world, not the ones who try to program it. Elon had realized something during that showdown with Soros, something deeper than the fraud or the fires. Democracy didn't just need defending, it needed debugging. Because the world had been coded, not in software, but in story. And the code was corrupt. Everywhere, reality had been infected. Anger was performative. Justice was selective. Public discourse was scripted like theater, funded like venture capital. So, Elon pivoted from the stage, point to the substrate. He called it Narrative Resilience Architecture, or NRA, a name deliberately engineered to trigger both confusion and controversy. It wasn't a government project. It wasn't a defense initiative. It was a blueprint, open source, decentralized, fractal, designed to rebuild civic perception through transparency, speed, and provable authenticity. Phase 1 was simple, immunize local communities. But Phase 2? That was the real bombshell. It started when whistleblowers from Soros's dissolved networks began surfacing, not just from the US, but everywhere. Argentina, Poland, Nigeria. A pattern emerged, microfoundations, funded through cascading crypto wallets, running engagement campaigns in emerging democracies. Different language. Same playbook. Disrupt elections. Polarize communities. Weaken trust. In one declassified exchange from a seized foundation Slack channel, a strategist had written, convince people that no one tells the truth, and it doesn't matter who lies. It wasn't sabotage anymore. It was psychological entropy. Make the system so muddy, so blurred, that truth drowned before it could even be spoken. And Elon had seen it coming. That's why Project Atlas wasn't just a countermeasure, it was a preemptive vaccine. By late spring, over 500 installations of the system were operating worldwide, under the radar, silently diffusing into the bloodstream of public life. From township libraries in Kentucky to radio stations in South Africa, people were starting to see headlines differently, not blindly trusting, but parsing, verifying, pausing before reacting, and the chaos merchants, they noticed. Within weeks, new proxy groups emerged, each more sanitized than the last. Gone were the graffiti slogans and viral chants. These new fronts wore suits, filed for 501c3 status, claimed to fight for narrative equity and algorithmic transparency. Their motto? Justice through simulation. It sounded noble. It was anything but. Their goal wasn't information. It was infiltration. To test the limits of Musk's new firewall. To reroute outrage in more sophisticated, harder to trace vectors. They weren't actors now. They were narrative engineers. They wrote op-eds, appeared on think tank panels, leaked fake memos. And Elon? He let them come. Because the second phase of Project Atlas was already live, not defensive. Offensive. A stealth feature called Spectre was baked into every installation, a real-time contagion tracker for perception manipulation. Not just watching the spread of lies, but tracing the origin nodes, who seeded the talking point, who paid for it, and who amplified it across platforms. The first Spectre report caused tremors in intelligence communities. It showed that 72% of high-velocity outrage campaigns in Cone originated from fewer than 15 individuals, all connected by encrypted servers, bouncing through NGOs registered in Luxembourg, Cyprus, and the Bahamas. One of them? A former senior executive at a digital agency tied to the Indivisible playbook, now rebranded as a Civic Health Research Institute. Another? A public relations advisor to two sitting U.S. senators. The truth wasn't just political anymore. It was logistical. The script had evolved. The players had changed outfits. But the mission remained. Control the inputs. Break the consensus. Seed distrust like malware into the democratic mind. But Spectre changed the game. For the first time, manipulation could be seen. Not just guessed. Mapped, measured, named. And with every name exposed, the curtain pulled back just a little more. And now, the curtain was starting to tear. At an international AI governance summit in Tokyo, an advisor from Norway leaned into the mic during a panel on cognitive integrity and said, "We no longer have the luxury of assuming outrage is organic." Across the table, a diplomat from Estonia added, "Information isn't flowing. It's being injected." And across the world in a live stream watched by 12 million people, a college freshman in Vermont simply asked, "When did truth become a subscription model?" The question echoed. Because it wasn't rhetorical anymore. And somewhere in Austin, Elon Musk, surrounded not by journalists, but by engineers, heard it too. He looked up from the map, not a map of roads, but of reactions. Each node a heartbeat. Each surge a spike of manufactured fury. Each dot a chance to intervene. And he whispered, not to himself, but into the encrypted mic on his collar, "Time for phase 3. Time for phase 3. The words didn't echo in the room. They didn't need to. The signal was digital. One line of audio transmitted through a hardened private Starlink channel, instantly fragmenting across the encrypted mesh of Project Atlas. Across 37 countries, 219 uplinks blinked once in perfect sync. Phase 3 had begun, and no one outside the network even knew what that meant. Not yet. But within minutes, symptoms started to appear. First, the glitches. Small at first, barely noticeable. Influencer posts flagged not by moderators, but by an invisible consensus protocol. Viral content dropped from trending feeds with no visible moderation trail. Click farms in Manila, Lagos, and Kiev logged bizarre throttling patterns content, failing to deploy at scale despite optimal metrics. Then came the leaks. One by one, the Spectre system released calibrated drops, not anonymous dumps, but curated exposures, each backed with verified metadata and immutable hash references. No plausible deniability. No time to spin the narrative. A memo from a New York lobbying firm titled Synthetic Rage Deployment, Q2 Objectives. An internal Slack message from a grassroots protest NGO. We'll need to simulate another escalation before the next election window. Soros Foundation will route funds via Zurich this time. A payment spreadsheet from a Canadian research lab tracking emotional volatility by zip code. And finally, a single audio file, just 17 seconds long. A voice, low, unmistakable. Control the perception, and you control the vote. Outrage is cheaper than policy. No name, no date. But the voice was real, and anyone paying attention recognized it. By day's end, every major government on Earth had received a classified briefing from their cyber divisions. And the conclusion was the same. Global information infrastructure has been compromised. But this wasn't a hack. It was a mirror. One Musk had just held up in front of the world. For years, nations had fought misinformation by treating it like malware, isolate, remove, patch. But Phase 3 proved the infection wasn't digital. It was behavioral. The outrage wasn't the virus. It was the vector. And the hosts, governments, agencies, even newsrooms. They weren't just covering chaos anymore, they were monetizing it. That's why Musk didn't launch Phase 3 with a keynote or a press release. He launched it with Spectre Open, a publicly accessible interface that let anyone, anywhere, trace the DNA of a story. Who posted it? Who paid for the amplification? What country the first server was in? How long before it hit the political bloodstream? It was clean, brutal, pure visibility. And the result? Panic. Media firms accused Musk of violating journalistic privacy. Governments called it unauthorized surveillance of public narrative. Think tanks decried it as unregulated disruption of epistemic ecosystems. But the public? They called it what it was. Receipts. A schoolteacher in Ohio ran her students through a lesson using Spectre Open. A mechanic in Berlin traced a fake climate protest back to a marketing firm in Brussels. A teenager in South Korea uncovered that 14 trending anti-vaccination hashtags originated from a single Russian shell server. Within days, trust in headlines collapsed, not out of despair, but out of clarity. People finally understood how perception was programmed. And then came the strike back. Phase 3 had triggered global countermeasures. The first came from Brussels. The EU passed an emergency regulation branding Musk's platforms as cognitive destabilization infrastructure, freezing Tesla operations across 6 countries, and issuing a warrant for Spectre's algorithmic source code. Canada followed suit, labeling Atlas a non-state actor-influenced system and banning all school and library installations. In Washington, a bipartisan coalition, hastily assembled, introduced the Digital Integrity and Sovereignty Act, designed specifically to neuter Project Atlas and bring it under congressional review. But Elon was ready. Spectre Open had already begun archiving every political and lobbying entity pushing against it, and the connections weren't subtle. Within hours, a heat map emerged. Almost every legal challenge was linked to firms previously flagged in Phase 2. Foreign influence fingerprints everywhere. And in an emergency livestream, brief, sharp, seen by over 90 million people, Elon stepped back onto the public stage. Not behind a podium, in front of a wall of rotating screenshots. No script. Just this, you told me democracy needed regulation, so I built one, not of power, but of pattern. And now you're afraid of the results? He didn't pause for applause. He tapped once. The screen shifted. One by one, names appeared, not in judgment, in transparency. The financiers, the strategists, the simulation architects, and then the final slide. Just 2 words: who profits? The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was revelatory, because now the question wasn't what happened. It was who built the machine. And the machine was real, more real than anyone wanted to admit. A year ago, you could have convinced anyone that democracy was still a battle of ideas. That truth was a public square and disagreement was healthy. Now? Now we knew it was a game of leverage, of simulations, of funded emotional code, and Elon Musk had made the invisible visible. The next morning, the first domino fell. A top-tier consultant for a global PR firm confessed on a podcast that she had personally overseen 47 manufactured escalation sequences in the last 3 years. When asked why she was coming forward, her answer was devastatingly simple. Because Spectre showed my name, and I couldn't look away from myself. Within a week, 3 sitting members of parliament in the UK resigned. 2 senators in the US were subpoenaed. A special prosecutor was appointed to investigate links between defense contractors and media influence networks. And George Soros? He never resurfaced. Some said he had returned to Europe. Some said he was in negotiation with the UN. Others said he never really existed in the form the media portrayed. But Musk? Musk moved forward. Not triumphant, just ready. He gave only one closing statement, broadcast across Starlink channels in a direct-to-citizen feed that bypassed all traditional media. If democracy can't survive visibility, then maybe it was never democracy to begin with. But I believe it can, because truth, real, verified, provable truth, doesn't need a PR firm. It just needs a signal. And then he turned off the camera, not to hide. But because the world finally knew how to watch, he turned off the camera, not to hide. But because the world finally knew how to watch. And that was the problem. Because once people could see, truly see, they couldn't unsee. The week after Elon's final broadcast wasn't marked by protests. It wasn't filled with debates or counter-narratives. It was marked by something far more destabilizing, a pause. News anchors hesitated before speaking. Editors withheld headlines for independent verification. Senators spoke without punchlines, waiting for fact-checkers to confirm their own words. It was like the world had exhaled its addiction to performance and didn't know what to do with the silence left behind. Even rage needed a script, and now the script had been burned. For the first time in decades, the public and the powerful were staring at each other without props. And what stared back was uncertainty, because visibility is not safety. Visibility is exposure, and with Spectre open saturating the digital bloodstream, accountability was no longer a political tool, it was ambient. It didn't care who you voted for. It didn't care about party lines or ideological branding. It only cared about integrity, which is why the first real collapse wasn't institutional, it was psychological. In Washington, a bipartisan delegation requested that Spectre's network be temporarily suspended to allow reestablishment of productive discourse. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. In Silicon Valley, multiple CEOs stepped down quietly, citing mission fatigue and irreconcilable shifts in public expectation. Translation, they couldn't navigate a world where transparency didn't end at the press release. Meanwhile, underground messaging groups and closed forums, once filled with conspiracy theorists and radicals, had begun to vanish, not because they were banned, but because there were no more shadows to whisper in. Every rumor now came with a breadcrumb trail. Every viral lie came with metadata. And the people? They were starting to feel something unfamiliar, mental clarity. It didn't arrive like a revelation. It arrived like morning fog lifting from a long, haunted night. Bit by bit, a school in rural Montana conducted a civic lab using Spectre data to reverse engineer last year's community outrage campaign. The students traced it back to a single campaign ad out of DC, masked by 3 middleman citizen groups that didn't actually exist. In Copenhagen, a municipal assembly voted unanimously to implement narrative transparency audits before any local legislation could be drafted. The idea spread like wildfire. In Sao Paulo, an independent journalist coalition used Spectre to cross-reference deforestation campaigns with real-time land acquisition filings, exposing a laundering loop that implicated 6 multinational firms and 1 sitting minister. Elon hadn't just exposed corruption, he had open-sourced narrative integrity. And like any open-source system, the public began iterating. New platforms emerged. Quiet, modular, grassroots built. not to replace Spectre, but to extend it. Communities began crowdsourcing visibility tools, not for profit, but for preservation. One platform allowed users to trace the genealogy of a single soundbite across 40 newsrooms. Another let citizens tag moments of political theater with a real-time scoreboard. Authentic, performative, coordinated, funded. It was the dawn of a new digital instinct. Is this real or is this paid? But not everyone welcomed the new instinct. Some feared it deeply because the truth was many didn't want to know. They wanted sides, they wanted villains, they wanted to be right more than they wanted to be informed. And now, for the first time, they had no place to hide that preference because the system reflected it back to them. Spectre's most controversial feature wasn't the exposure of media. It wasn't the unmasking of NGOs or lobbying networks. It was the reflection of public behavior. Every user had a transparency index, not visible to others, only to themselves. It showed how often they engaged with verified versus manipulated content, how frequently they shared stories that turned out to be performative, whether they followed informational integrity or tribal identity. It didn't judge. It simply showed them themselves. And that, for many, was too much. Some denied it. Others logged off entirely. But a few, just enough, chose to change. Not because Elon told them to, because truth, once revealed, had weight, and some shoulders were finally ready to carry it. Meanwhile, in an undisclosed facility on the edge of Nevada, the final phase of Project Atlas was coming online. It wasn't digital, it wasn't even software, it was architectural, the forum, not a metaphor, not a platform. A physical structure, minimalist, geometric, built like a civic observatory, part data vault, part agora, part tribunal. Here, in person, verified citizens could bring evidence. Disruptions, pattern flags, not to shout them into the void, but to register them into a new form of record, not media, not litigation, but memory. The forum's purpose was simple: preserve what the world tried to forget, because visibility fades, because history gets rewritten unless someone writes it down, uncurated, unfiltered, unspun. And Elon? He didn't run the forum, he didn't speak at it, he didn't fund it anymore. He had already moved on. His voice returned just once, remotely, through a pre-recorded audio file played at the forum's opening night. The future isn't about defeating lies. It's about outlasting them. And to do that, we need architecture stronger than memory and quieter than propaganda. No applause, just entry. One by one, people began walking forward. Citizens, farmers, coders, librarians, immigrants, engineers, and placing evidence on the table, not opinions, artifacts, bits of broken reality, documents, audio clips, screenshots, photographs. Some items were accepted, some were flagged for deeper analysis, but all were seen, all were witnessed. Because the world had entered a new era, not of control, but of capacity. A place where democracy didn't mean who yelled loudest or spent the most. It meant who could navigate the truth without running from it. And for the first time in a generation, that idea had a home. The forum didn't broadcast, it archived. And the silence that filled its halls wasn't empty. It was earned.